Hey, this is Scott Photography Bonsai. Today we're going to look at this goofy macro setup I put together on a whim. I wanted to use what I had on hand, do some macro photography, and this is it. At least some of it. I had a Canon EOS M50 camera, two different sets of extension tubes, EFM, and then also M42 mount with an M42 mount lens. This is a Asahi Super Takumar 50mm f1.4 lens, basically Pentax before they were Pentax. Really nice, simple, normal lens. I also had the Smallrig cage and two different brackets with two lighting pieces. So we have these simple LED lights. They're bicolor. I was probably at 5200 Kelvin in that case, set to 75% power on both of them. Simple setup, but in the land of macro photography, I'm sure it's relatively tame. The main goal was to see how it would work out and have some fun with macro photography. I took the rig out to my local state park, two different areas. One area had a nice large pond. Tried to get some photos. I wanted to get photos of sand, but it's all blocked off with fencing, so I really couldn't get much of that, but there were a few different areas. It was extremely windy, which made it challenging to get focus and such. Moved on to another area, which was a little better. Macro photography is so unique compared to other styles or other types of photography, in my opinion, because you move two steps and you have a new subject. It's potentially very foreign and very different than what we see in everyday life. And it's just really fun to take a crazy setup out and mess around with it. With macro photography, there are a few things to keep in mind when you want to do it. One is light. You want to get as much light as possible into the scene, because you want to use smaller apertures. I really couldn't lower my aperture too much in this situation, even with those two lights there, but I tried to do it as much as I can because you want more in focus, and when you're doing macro photography, you have generally very thin depth of field to work with. You can adjust your position to get more generally in focus based on what you're photographing. Like if it has a nice flat surface, try to get that flat surface on the main focus plane. But also keep in mind, you got the light, you have the smaller apertures, and focusing. So with focusing, I take the lens and have it focus as close as it can, and then I just use my hands, I use my arms, I use my whole body to adjust where it's focusing. It's relatively easy to tell where it's focusing because it's generally so thin depth of field. As for the results, I think they turned out pretty interesting, but of course, with the lens, it's not super amazing quality-wise, and I couldn't use smaller apertures. A lot of the time, I just didn't have enough light, even when it was outside with those extra lights. It was a little challenging, especially with the lights that I use that are kind of big, and they restricted my movement up close to surfaces and things of that nature. But I think if you want to really get an easier time with macro, one, use a dedicated macro lens and then add extension tubes to that. That way, usually maybe a 100mm lens or 150, even 200mm macro lens will give you a lot more working distance in those situations. But besides that, it worked relatively well. I hope you enjoyed this little photo outing with macro photography in this goofy looking setup. I definitely enjoyed going out there and taking photos with it. I'm Scott from Photography Bonsai. If you did enjoy this video, please consider subscribing. Helps me out a lot. Likes and shares help out a lot as well. Thanks again.